only thing that gon' be normal is distribution. Normal folks gon' infuse some. Optimize your lineups and you feed the rest, you mute them. Turning it up, these numbers are loud. Peeping this game from a nimbus is wild. Making it rain. While I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world.
And welcome in to the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast and live stream. My name is Bradley Stalder. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. And if you like the content, make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button. Welcome to the Best Bell Fantasy community. And tonight, I'm going to be answering fantasy football questions that y'all are going to ask, but also I'm going to throw a couple of start-sit questions in for the group. So make sure that you are jumping into the comments and into the chat. Love getting your start-sit answers at this point. We've got the New England game tomorrow against the actually, it's not New England. It is the LA Rams versus the Las Vegas Raiders Thursday night. Game's going to be in LA, and the Raiders are a very interesting streaming DST, so hopefully you pick them up off of your waiver wire. The Rams, they might be starting Baker Mayfield this week. That could prove disastrous. Right now, I don't even see Baker Mayfield as a player that I'm confidently ranking. His expert consensus for Fantasy Pros is quarterback 33. There are 26 teams that are active right now. He is expected to be active for this game against the Rams. He may or may not play. John Wolford is questionable going into this game. We don't know who's going to start. Looking at like Bryce Perkins, right? He is also expected to be available, but has been pulled numerous times throughout this week or this game. He didn't even have a pass attempt against Seattle. He had one rush for 5 yards and had previously played in 3 games, weeks 10, 11, and 12. This is Bryce Perkins. And he's finished quarterback 30, 27, and 30. So yeah, Baker Mayfield, he has struggled this year. There's no question about that. But he finishes quarterback 13 week 1 against Buffalo, threw 2 touchdowns. He had a pick, 235 passing yards. But then it started to go downhill. Quarterback 21, quarterback 26, and then 2 straight quarterback 28s. Then Baker Mayfield, gets benched, and it's PJ Walker time. And then Baker Mayfield gets, play as the third string defensive tackle for the Carolina Panthers. And then week 9 against Tampa, 14 of 20, 155 yards and threw 2 touchdowns, finishes the quarterback 16 that week. Then benched again against Arizona, week 11, New Orleans, 21 of 33. So 63% completion percentage against New Orleans, almost 200 passing yards, like 2 interceptions. But New Orleans is a tough defense. We saw how they shut down Tom Brady for almost the entirety of the game. So quarterback 25 finish that week. I mean, I think quarterback 33 is too low. If we knew Baker Mayfield is going to get the start, like, would we put him at like quarterback 25 on the week, like the second lowest possibly? Like, are we starting Baker Mayfield against Vegas, or are we starting Sam Darnold against Seattle if we knew that Baker Mayfield was going to get the start? Like, not that you're like but desperate times, right? Desperate times call for desperate starts. And here we are, week 14, 6 teams on a bye. You're probably in need of some help. Serendipity Trick Shots, what's up? Hope all is well with you. Let's get into answering some of the start-sit questions. And one player that I would recommend starting, do I start quarterback Jared Goff this week? Well, Goff gets the Minnesota Vikings, and starting Jared Goff has been pretty good as of late. The Vikings allow the most receiving yards to wide receivers on the season. Mike White finished as the quarterback 7 last week. And that was without Mike White throwing a passing touchdown. He did have a rushing score, but White threw 2 interceptions. Surprisingly, in this game, the Detroit Lions, who are 5-7, are favored against the 10-2 Vikings. At least the last time I checked the lines. They're playing in Detroit this week. Jared Goff is also coming off a quarterback 4 overall finish where he threw for 340 yards and 2 touchdowns to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Remember, Goff was the 101 rookie pick back in 2016. He is 6th in red zone pass attempts. The Lions are 6th in pace of play, but Jared Goff also willing to take shots down the field. Number 1 in danger plays, 14th in air yards, 7th in passing yards, 9th in adjusted air yards per attempt. So he's been willing to air it out a little bit. Okay. His QBR is 6th highest among quarterbacks. His expected points added 6th best among quarterback. And he's really flourished behind the Detroit Lions offensive line. He's the number 1 quarterback in clean pocket accuracy rating. So when he gets that clean pocket, he's able to make good throws, and he's able to also eat up against the zone. So Minnesota, they've struggled in that secondary, and Jared Goff, this is a smash spot, not just for Goff, but also like you're confidently playing Amon-Ra St. Brown in this matchup. Amon-Ra right now is tentatively my wide receiver 2 on the week. He has the highest PFF secondary advantage versus individual cornerbacks. Against C. Sullivan, he has a 100% PFF graded advantage. And as I mentioned, the Minnesota Vikings give up the most receiving yards. So if you're taking a deep shot on wide receivers, Khalif Raymond, Josh Reynolds, Jameson Williams, like obviously Jameson Williams not getting a lot of snaps last week, but that's why we're confidently starting quarterback Jared Goff this week. Serendipity trick shots. Who do I start at the flex? DJ Moore, Nico Collins, Zay Jones. Yeah, things are yikes. Whew. It's a jungle out there, isn't it? Serendipity trick shots. Let me pull up my wide receiver rankings. We'll talk through some of it. Nico Collins just popped up on the injury report. He's questionable. And my concern with this is that, Nico Collins has a foot injury. He did not participate on Wednesday. He was limited earlier. And so we hope that he's going to be able to play. He's the consensus wide receiver 38 right now. He finished as wide receiver 27 last week, going 3 for 35 in the touchdown against Cleveland. But Dallas is a tough secondary. They are the 3rd best coverage grade per PFF. So with Brandon Cooks possibly out again, we don't know what Brandon Cooks' status is going to be for this week. And in a game where I think this is going to be a massive drubbing, even with Davis Mills back in the mix, because that's an announcement. Davis Mills is expected to play for get the start for the Houston Texans this past week. The Kyle Allen experiment is very much over. So Nico Collins is a high-end wide receiver 4. I have Zay Jones over him, and Zay Jones is an interesting upside pick. So Tennessee allows the most touchdowns to wide receivers in the league. They allow the most wide receiver fantasy points in the league. And if you're pivoting off of Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, yes, he disappointed last week, but he had 7 targets. It wasn't as though he would goose-egged, right? There's been 3 straight games where Zay Jones has had at least 7 targets. Kansas City, he went 8 for 68. Baltimore, 11 for 145. Last week against Detroit, he missed a touchdown. He dropped a couple other passes. He fell on the wrong side of variance, finishes the wide receiver 77. But I think better days are ahead against this Tennessee secondary that has massively struggled. Tennessee has bottled up running backs, but they have given up fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So I would have Zay Jones over Nico Collins, and then DJ Moore gets Seattle. Let me see what the lines are for. Let me refresh the page, make sure that we're all squared away. But the lines for the Seattle Carolina game is the over-under is 44, which is, middle of the pack. It's not the 37s where Baltimore and Pittsburgh are at, or Tampa Bay and San Francisco are at, which the 37 over-under for San Francisco, Tampa Bay feels low, but that's probably right with Brock Purdy and then with also Tom Brady struggling. But back with Carolina and Seattle, right? The last time we saw DJ Moore, he finished as the wide receiver 9 against Denver, 4 for 103 on 6 targets. He had a touchdown. It's been a really up and down year for DJ Moore because over his last 6 games, pretty much Jekyll and Hyde. Wide receiver 8, wide receiver 5 in week 7 and 8 against Tampa Bay and Atlanta. And then he finished wide receiver 50 or worse than the following 3 weeks. Wide receiver 50, week 9 against Cincy. Wide receiver 64 against Atlanta. Wide receiver 63 against Baltimore. All of those games, though, at least 5 targets. So it wasn't as though he was getting 0 targets or 3 targets or whatever. I think the higher upside here is in this Carolina-Seattle game. I wonder about the matchup, if he's going to get Tariq Woolen. I think that's the name. Tariq Woolen, I think, is the name. So there we go. I would, if I were picking, I would go DJ Moore, Zay Jones, Nico Collins, but that's a tough one. By the way, my baseball coach Jared Goff back in the day. Nice. Just fun story. Love the stories, serendipity, trick shots. Appreciate you jumping in. I know my flex sucks, but both Eckler and CMC as well. Mahomes in a 12-team league. Yeah, this is by apocalypse, by Mageddon, baby. With Green Bay and New Orleans and Atlanta and Chicago, right? All on bye. Washington on bye. I think that's 5 of the 6 teams that are on bye this week. It can get really ugly really fast for you, and so I get it that we're picking in these awkward times, right? Would I start Jared Goff or Kyler Murray this week? And they're very, very close, right? Jared Goff gets Minnesota. Kyler Murray gets New England on Monday night, and you're going to have to make a decision because Kyler has finished as the quarterback 3, 8, and 4 each of the last 3 games that he's played. And in 2 of those 3 games, thrown for less than 195 yards. He's been making it happen on the ground. We expect Nuke to be there. Hollywood Brown is fully recovered. Rondell Moore, which I'll talk about later on in the live stream, he should be back. So I think the passing options, this is in Arizona as well. So I think I'm still going Kyler over Jared Goff, but that's a tough one. Let's look at the over under for that game, because maybe that can sway my opinion the other way. The Detroit Lions Minnesota game is 52.5 over under. Ooh, that's going to be hard to beat. And then the Monday night New England Arizona game is over under is 44, and implied points is like 22-23 for the Arizona Cardinals, whereas the Vikings, oh wow, the line has shifted. It was -1 for Detroit, now it's -2.5. So they're expecting the Lions to score like 28. Although you have to think that a lot of that is going to go to Jamal Williams. It's going to go to DeAndre Swift on the ground. Give me the Kyler Murray still, but it's really close. I think this is the right price point. Sober thoughts from YouTube. That's where I would go. Still Murray, but it's very close. Do I start Daniel Jones this week for fantasy? Well, we've seen some scary floors for Daniel Jones. He's had 4 weekly finishes of quarterback 20 or worse, and that's not encouraging. And outside the Detroit Lions game, Jones hasn't thrown for more than 228 passing yards in any game this year and hasn't cracked more than 200 pass yards in 8 of his 12 games. Now, the New York Giants get the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles allow the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And there is a significant offensive-defensive line matchup differential that we have to take note of. The defensive line for the Eagles are projected to have a 25% pass block advantage per PFF over the Giants' offensive line. And Daniel Jones, looking at some of the metrics here, he is not thrown a lot of danger plays, which is good, but also not a lot of money throws either. So it seems like he's been pretty conservative. He's not thrown the ball down the field a lot. He's not taken a lot of chances. He only has 11 interceptable passes. That is 28th among quarterbacks. That's pretty good. He's played pretty conservatively. He's not thrown the ball deep. He's 29th in deep ball attempts. And when Kenny Golladay is not making it happen for you, when Darius Slayton has been more of an intermediate guy than a super deep threat, that's where you're going to see Daniel Jones make his money. It's the rushing for Jones, right? Daniel Jones is 4th among quarterbacks in carries, 5th in carries per game, 3rd in red zone carries for the quarterback position. He's 5th in quarterback rushing yards with 522 so far in the season. He averages 43.5 rush yards per game. He has 4 rushing scores on the year. But do I start Daniel Jones? I'm probably looking elsewhere in one quarterback leagues. Daniel Jones is the consensus quarterback 15 this week, but I would start. I mean, it's going to be hard to say, I'm starting Daniel Jones over Mike White after what Mike White has done the last couple games, right? Are you starting Deshaun Watson or Daniel Jones? I think you're still starting Daniel Jones, but it's close. The Deshaun Watson experiment week 1 against Houston, we knew that was going to be a tough matchup. Right now, Deshaun Watson is the consensus quarterback 14, but he finished as the quarterback 30 last week. And Cincinnati's secondary is pretty tough against wide receivers. So I wonder if this is also going to be a tougher matchup for Watson to access a ceiling. And Watson also didn't rush, super effectively, only 21 rushing yards on 7 rush attempts. So Daniel Jones is in that spot for me. He's still, a mid to high end quarterback 2, but there is a scary floor because the Philadelphia Eagles only allow 10.7 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, and that's the fewest to quarterbacks. So I am concerned about Daniel Jones accessing a ceiling as well this week. You want to be, like, if I'm picking between Daniel Jones and Jared Goff, it's easily Jared Goff this week. All right, sober thoughts. Do I pick up Goff last week because I had Murray? It's a 1 quarterback league. The question is, what do I do with Goff? Try to trade him or just drop him? I mean, it's going to be hard to let him into the waiver wire because he's going to be so highly sought, right? If you know that someone else isn't going to start Jared Goff, like, fine. But you probably want to keep Jared Goff around for a little bit. I mean, looking at what Minnesota is a smash matchup. The Jets have been tough against quarterbacks, and so have Carolina. But week 17, like, I am really in on this Chicago-Detroit matchup, week 17. Like, Jared Goff plus Amon-Ra St. Brown in a dome, like, sign me up for that. So if you can just hold on for a little bit, that's what I would do, sober thoughts. I know that Jared Goff has hit for you. He hit at quarterback 14. So, yeah, it's a 1 quarterback league. Probably going to have to drop him, though. Sober thoughts. The problem is I own Fields, Murray, and Goff, I assume. So, yes, I think you're going to have to drop. I think you're going to have to drop at that point. Hey, Bradley, who do I start in a flex full PPR? Jurgen? Judy. Judy, there we go. Secret says Judy, Mike Williams, Devonta Smith, or Mostert. Also need one start for running back Fournette or Mostert full PPR. Okay. Well, Judy, Mike Williams, Devonta Smith, or Mostert. If I'm picking one of those and I need to pick right now, I would go Devonta Smith. We don't know the stats from Mike Williams. We don't know how Jerry Judy is going to do. Cortland Sutton is doubtful, but the offense is just atrocious. And Judy himself is questionable for this game. He's limited by an ankle injury. He did return last week. He finishes the wide receiver 30, wide receiver 40 in half PPR. He went 4 for 65 on 4 targets. Cortland Sutton left this game early, and Judy still only mustered 4 targets. This is Greg Dulcich. You know, if you're needing a tight end, it's Greg Dulcich in this Denver offense. But Mostert, I wish we could trust this Miami backfield a little bit more. I talked about this on the GOAT District podcast last night, but the matchup is phenomenal. It's Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert against the LA Chargers. And the Chargers give up some of the most fantasy points to the running back position. There is a significant offensive defensive line advantage. The Miami Dolphins have a PFF projected 42% run block advantage over the LA Chargers. And so, like, could one of Jeff Wilson or Raheem Mostert go off? Absolutely. But I'm not sure which one it is. And instead, wide receiver Devonta Smith for the Eagles gets the New York Giants. And the Giants were pretty tough against opposing wide receivers earlier in the season. But Smith's individual matchup against their secondary is a PFF graded 91% advantage, which is one of the highest on the year. For reference, like 50% is average. It could fall one way or the other. 91% is one of the highest. The highest on the week for week 14 is, of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 100%. So you're firing him up there. I would go Devonta Smith. It's a positive matchup. You expect a positive game script. We've seen Devonta Smith have some real upside games as of late. And he finishes the wide receiver 9. This, I think that's standard. In a half point, he finished as the wide receiver 10. He went 5 for 102 on 8 targets. Smith has finished with at least 8 targets in 5 of the last 6 games. So I would go with Devonta Smith. You're going to get target share. You're going to get some upside. It's a good matchup. So that's where I would go. What are my thoughts on Rondale Moore? Is he better than DJ Moore? Well, let's talk about Rondale Moore. Do I start Rondale Moore this week? Well, Moore may have left the Week 11 contest against San Francisco early due to a groin strain. His coaches expect him to be ready for Monday night against New England. Prior to that injury, Rondale Moore had finished as the wide receiver 21 or better in 3 consecutive weeks. And yes, Hollywood Brown may be back along with DeAndre Hopkins, but Zach Ertz is out for the season. And those type of slot routes close to the line of scrimmage, middle of the field, those fit in with what Rondale Moore, those types of routes, those types of targets are going to go Moore's way. So I think he is a start this week if he is in fact cleared, and we expect him to be cleared. It might be a tougher matchup against New England, but Rondale Moore's got 4.37 speed, 97th percentile burst score, 93rd percentile agility score. This is a former second round pick, a 22.6% target rate, a nearly 20% target share on the season. Rondale Moore, 19th in the NFL among wide receivers in yards after catch, which is pretty nice. He's been a reliable target for Kyler Murray, his target accuracy, 10th when targeted. So it's pretty good for Rondale Moore. He has dropped a few passes, which has been frustrating, but he gets a lot of separation versus man coverage. In fact, he is third highest among all wide receivers in target separation versus man. So Rondale Moore is a very interesting start for me this week against New England. He's probably faded in a lot of your leagues. He might have been cut. And check your waiver wires for Rondale Moore because he's coming off of the bye week. In your shallower leagues, Rondale Moore is an interesting flex consideration as we move forward. Just a reminder, put your start sit questions in the chat. Appreciate y'all jumping in, asking those. And I'm going to also talk about some other players that we should be starting or sitting for this week. One of the questions is, do I start quarterback Derek Carr? Well, Derek Carr, if you've got him, he's a must start on Thursday against the Rams, right? I mentioned earlier in the live stream that the Rams may be playing with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, and this could be a real important game for the Raiders to win. Carr finishes the quarterback 13 or better in 4 of his last 5 games. In each of those 5 games, though, over that 5-game stretch, Carr's thrown for at least 248 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. The Rams, they're without Aaron Donald this week. He was just officially ruled out a couple hours ago. And the Raiders have a projected 41% pass block advantage per PFF over the LA Rams now that Aaron Donald not going to play in this game. It could get out of control, but here's my thinking with this. It may get out of control. The Raiders might put up a lot of points against the Rams, but it's going to be one of those Detroit Lions putting up 40 points on the Jaguars type of game, because the Raiders need not just a win, but a moral victory. There have been a lot of heartbreaking losses for the Raiders this year. They've won some games in overtime as well, but they need to get back into the playoffs and playoff contention. And the only way to do that is to not only have big wins, but have momentous wins. And getting a momentous win on a big stage would be emphatic. That's what we're looking at. So I think Derek Carr is going to be looking for Davante Adams pretty regularly. You've got to have high confidence in Davante Adams. I mean, he's been the wide receiver 1 over the last few weeks. So you're starting Derek Carr. If you have him on Thursday, he should be in a pretty confident start for you. Get him into your starting lineups and fill him in. You got to be comfortable with Derek Carr. Like, you got to move him over Trevor Lawrence. I think you can even consider him in that Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff tier as well, with the type of upside matchup that we're looking at. I mean, Thursday night, it's a 43.5 over under, but the Raiders are favored by 6.5 points, almost 7 points. We will see if that line shifts, if we get an official announcement of who is starting at quarterback for the Rams. Let's see. Another player I want to talk about is, do I start Tom Brady this week? Tom Brady honestly did not pass the eye test on Monday against the Saints. It took him 54 pass attempts to get to the quarterback 8 finish overall, and he still didn't get to 300 passing yards. Brady's finished as a top 10 weekly quarterback only 3 times in the 12 games he's played, and the matchup against the 49ers, that's not a promising one. The 49ers, they're real tough against opposing quarterbacks. They give up the 5th fewest fantasy points, and their defensive line is projected to have a 25% pass block advantage over the Bucs offensive line. As we know, the Bucs offensive line has been rotating in and out. It's been inconsistent, and Brady's been struggling to get the ball out deep. And when he has thrown the ball deep. He's missed like Julio Jones on some deep passes. So in what projects to be the lowest game total over under on the week, I'm really worried about Tom Brady's ceiling and accessing his ceiling, right? The Brady leads the NFL in pass attempts. He's 5th in deep ball attempts. The Bucs are number 1 in team pass plays per game and pace of play per game. But Tom Brady is 32nd in yards per attempt. He's just not connecting. He's 12th in interceptable passes, which is not what you want to see. He's 17th in danger plays, 12th in pressured throws, as we talked about the offensive line being a source of tension for him this year. And is 16th in true pass rating, 20th in quarterback rating. Receiving yards after the catch per target is 63rd. He's just not giving his wide receivers room to catch. His receiver target separation is 56th. Like, he's got to pop it in there, either close to the line of scrimmage, or his receivers down the field aren't getting the separation that he needs. So Tom Brady is a sit for me if you can afford it this week. Like, I'm starting Mike White over Tom Brady. Maybe that's a little spicy, but White gets the Buffalo Bills, and the Bills haven't been as shut down against quarterbacks as, one might think. And yes, I think we're scarred from last year's 4-interception, no touchdown game that Mike White had. But you also have to think, like, now he's had some games under his belt starting. Now he's coming off of 2 straight games with 315 passing yards and 4 total touchdowns in that span. He's finished as the quarterback 7 each of the last 2 weeks or better. So I'm starting Mike White over Tom Brady this week. It's just how far Brady has fallen despite the passing volume. And Brady, as we know, doesn't do anything with his legs. So Brady is not a start for me this week. Unfortunately, got to bump him down in the rankings. All right, if you're watching, you got questions, you want to get your Week 14 rankings questions, start sits answered, put them in the comments. I'll answer those, but I'll also talk about some other start sit players. I've talked about some quarterbacks so far. We can move to running backs. And one of the questions is, do I start running back Latavius Murray? And this is a week of bad matchups and 6 teams on a bye. And Murray projects as a comfortable volume-based running back too. He's handled 47 carries over the last 3 weeks, so over 15 carries per game. He's finished on average as the running back 24, so back-end running back 2. And the Broncos, they might be a 9.5-point underdog against the Chiefs this week, but the Kansas City Chiefs allow the most receptions per game to the running back position, and Murray has 4 receptions in 2 of the last 3 games. And look, he's not a win-the-week type of running back, but if he gets 15 carries for 60 yards and has 3 catches for 20 yards, we're talking 8-10 points with the possibility of falling into the end zone. I think that's fine. He's not going to lose you the week. I think I'm okay starting Latavius Murray comfortably as a back-end running back too. He's going to get the volume, and with the possibility of him falling in the end zone, I'm okay with starting Latavius Murray this week. It's not a super negative matchup. You're okay with Latavius Murray. If you've got him, I'm starting Zonovan Knight over Latavius Murray, but I'm also pretty bullish on Zonovan. So Latavius Murray, back-end running back too. It's going to be okay. It's more the volume, and I'm not worried about like Mike Boone or other running backs from Denver getting sprinkled in. It's the Latavius Murray show and his backfield. All right, Mark from YouTube is asking, since you said Mike White over Tom Brady, would you say the same about Huntley over Brady or Mike White? That's a good question. So right now I do have Tyler Huntley. He's the consensus quarterback 17. I have him at 18 right now. There's not a lot of optimism about Huntley. Let me pull up Huntley stats. I think what happens, and I talked about this on the Goat District podcast, is we had one good game, like really elite game from Tyler Huntley last season, and that was against my Green Bay Packers, where he finished as the quarterback 1 overall. He scored 36 fantasy points, 73 rushing yards. He had 2 rushing scores, threw for 2 passing touchdowns. But Tyler Huntley, he played 5 games last year where he had at least 30 attempts in each of those games. He only threw touchdowns in 2 of those 5 games. He had 1 game with a rushing score, and it was the week 15 where 4 of his 5 touchdowns came in that 1 game. So that's like seared in our brain, is like, we've seen the massive upside, but it's also against Pittsburgh, right? And it's not like the Baltimore Ravens have this bastion of receiving talent to help bail out Tyler Huntley, right? Huntley, or the Ravens and Steelers, it's an over-under of 37 this week. It's the lowest on the week, the over-under. We don't expect a lot of points scored in this game. And yes, like, Huntley has a floor of 40 rushing yards, let's say. But Tom Brady, I think you're going to get more passing volume floor from Brady than you are going to get rushing floor from Huntley. So I would still have Tom Brady over Huntley. That's how I have it. So Mike White, Tom Brady, and then Huntley is how I have the rankings for those 3 particular quarterbacks this week. Okay. Good question, though. Good question. Good clarification. Serendipity Trick Shots. Any thoughts on Jerick McKinnon? Well, let me pull up my running back rankings, and we'll talk about Jerick McKinnon real briefly. Right now, Jerick McKinnon is the consensus running back 33. He finishes the running back 16 last week. He got the touchdown, had 2 receptions, 2 targets. He had the same amount of targets as Isaiah Pacheco, which is interesting. He also tied a season high with 8 rush attempts against Cincinnati. Denver, this is not a game where I anticipate the Chiefs are being pushed to score by the Broncos, right? The Broncos have struggled to score points. They score, I think it's barely over a touchdown a game. Russell Wilson, the memes are famous, right? If you look up on TikTok, like, go right now on, if you have a TikTok account, and look up Russell Wilson touchdowns versus bathrooms, right? It's hilarious. It's just hilarious how, he doesn't even have as many passing touchdowns as he has bathrooms in his mansion. So what does this tie into with Jerick McKinnon? McKinnon is driven more by game script. He's a third down, long down and distance type of running back. He gets a lot of the targets. In fact, McKinnon has 3 games this season with 6 or more targets. He has 6, 8, and 8 game. And in those games, he's finished as the running back 24, 28, and 50, where he gets at least 6 targets. But we've also seen like some bottom floor, right? Week 4 against Tampa, he was running back 72. Week 3 against Indy, he was running back 64. So it seems like most of his rankings end up being between like running back 45 and running back 35. And so consensus 33 feels a little bit spicy, but it's fine. I think that you're looking at starting still like the James Cooks of the world over Jerick McKinnon. You're starting the Cam Akers of the world over Jerick McKinnon. I think you're starting Kyren Williams over Jerick McKinnon. And even with Williams only getting 27 to 30% of the snaps this past week, he did only get 4 opportunities after coming off a 14 opportunity game against Kansas City. Kyren Williams, I've been talking up Kyren Williams for a while, and this is a Vegas Raiders defense that gives up the most receiving yards to running backs, 54.3 on the season. So Kyren Williams, the pass catching back, Cam Akers does not fit that profile. So I would anticipate Kyren Williams being an interesting play this week if you're desperate. But yeah, I don't have a high level of confidence in Kyren Williams. It's just an interesting speculative ad. You're starting Jerick McKinnon over Kenyon Drake. You're starting him over a Kenneth Gainwell, a Jalen Warren. Like he's a different tier, than those types of players. They're serendipity trick shots. All right, we're going to answer another question. Do I start Jamaal Williams this week? And Jamaal Williams has made his living off of touchdowns this season, right? He's had a lot. He leads the NFL in rushing scores, has converted an uncanny amount of 1-yard touchdowns because Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeAndre Swift just somehow go down 1 yard before the end zone. But the rushing inefficiency has come against even the most generous of rushing defenses. Williams has averaged fewer than 4 yards per carry in every game since week 9. And in week 14, he faces the Minnesota Vikings, and the Vikings give up 3.89 yards per carry to opposing running backs. So inefficiency compounded by inefficiency. And then the lack of snaps. That's my biggest concern about Jamaal Williams. He played the fewest snaps of the season in week 13, and he's decreased his snap share each of the last 3 weeks. As we've seen DeAndre Swift increase, we've seen Jamaal Williams decrease, right? So there's a what goes up must come down scenario happening. And I'm playing Jamaal Williams at my own risk. Like, can he fall in the end zone? Absolutely, just like he has this season. But I'm not confidently starting him as a running back 2 this week. It's a tough matchup, and Jamaal Williams needs to be not like a mid-pack running back 2, but I think you're starting like Zonovan Knight over him. I think you're starting like Latavius Murray over him. The Minnesota Vikings have the second best run defense grade per PFF. So Jamaal Williams, as I said, can he fall in the end zone? Yes, we've seen that time and again. But also DeAndre Swift has increased his usage, and I think my biggest concern about Williams is the lack of snaps. So start him at your own risk. I think this is the riskiest part of the year for Jamaal Williams. If I have another back-end running back 2, like I'm, of course, starting James Conner over him. I'm starting Isaiah Pacheco over Jamaal Williams. I think you're starting, obviously DeAndre Swift over Jamaal Williams. I don't think I would get as spicy as Leonard Fournette at this point because of the tough matchup against San Francisco. But if we get clarity about Jeff Wilson, could we see Raheem Mostert get over Jamaal Williams? I think that's a real possibility. So I think Williams is a lot riskier this week in week 14. We've got some questions in the chat. If you haven't put your question in the chat, make sure you do. That would be great. Chaka from YouTube. Appreciate you jumping in, Chaka. Hollywood or Watson rest of season? Well, we're talking rest of season, and unfortunately, Christian Watson is on bye this week, right? So you're not starting him. And the way I see it is there are two very important games that you have to keep in mind. The first game is the game you're playing this week, and the championship week, because you want to prepare yourself for this week. You need to win this week, unless of course you're guaranteed a bye and blah, blah, blah. But not a lot of teams are in that scenario. So Christian Watson, obviously you're benching him during the bye week. You're not starting him. You're playing Hollywood Brown this week, but where does Hollywood Brown rank? Right now, he's the wide receiver consensus 23 against New England on Monday night. He did finish as the wide receiver 52 in his first game back against the Chargers. He went 6 for 46, but he had 8 targets, which is really, really interesting to me because DeAndre Hopkins only had 6 targets in that game. So he out-targeted DeAndre Hopkins. Rondale Moore may be back, but Hollywood plays on the outside. If anything, the Rondale Moore situation, as I mentioned earlier in the live stream, I am more concerned about Rondell Moore and his health as a start-sit decision, rather than is Rondell Moore going to get the amount of targets? Because I think Kyler Murray has enough pass volume to get the ball to Hopkins and Hollywood and Rondell Moore. Greg Dortch is a strict handcuff to Rondell Moore. So that's how I would view those players moving forward. And then week 17, the Arizona Cardinals get Atlanta. They get the Atlanta Falcons, which is a smash matchup. It's in a dome, which is also really nice. And then Christian Watson gets the Vikings, right? And that game is in Green Bay. It could be cold. It could be tough, right? Can Christian Watson go off? Absolutely. He's been crushing this year. Let's not make two bones about it. Like, Christian Watson has been making plays time and again. He could score from anywhere on the field. He's got 4.36 speed, 96th percentile, 98th percentile speed score, 95th percentile burst score. Is a reason why he was the 34th overall pick in the draft. I was skeptical of him this year because he got off to a slow start and he had been injured, but a 25% target rate when he's been on the field is really, really nice. Yes, it's only a 13% target share, but he's increased his route participation this season. He has 9 touchdowns on the year. He's 11th among wide receivers in yards per reception, 13th in yards per target, 14th in yards per route run. He's got the highest target premium in the NFL among wide receivers, 92.2%. Fantasy points per route run, he's wide receiver 1. Fantasy points per target, he's wide receiver 1 overall. So Christian Watson, has a tremendous upside, but I still like the Hollywood matchup. We're noticing and monitoring this moving forward. And if we'll see how the Packers are looking as well. They might start Jordan Love if they're out of it, and Aaron Rodgers is hurt, week 17, or is still recovering from his injuries. They might shut him down if they're eliminated from playoff contention. So that might also be a consideration. Rest of season, I think the safest play is Hollywood Brown, but Christian Watson offers you league winning upside, as we've seen from the fantasy points per target and fantasy points per route run that he's put up on the season. He's also number 1 in fantasy points per target versus man coverage. 3.3 is the highest among wide receivers. So as I said, his ceiling is absolutely massive. But this is a situation I'm monitoring. If I'm calling it right now, I think it's still Hollywood over Watson, but it would not surprise me. I think there's just too wide of a range of outcomes for Christian Watson looking at week 17. Antonio Lopez from YouTube, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you. Should I start Rachaad White, Darius Slayton, or Cam Akers? Right now, Darius Slayton is my wide receiver 34 on the week. That's where he's at consensus as well. So I haven't really deviated. This is a tough matchup for Darius Slayton, Antonio. The Philadelphia Eagles had the 4th highest PFF coverage grade. There is a negative 25% pass block advantage that the Giants have. So the Eagles have a 25% pass block advantage over the offensive line of the Giants. That's what's projected. And then with the specific matchup, Darius Slayton has a bottom 4% advantage versus Philadelphia secondary, which is among the lowest of all wide receivers in the NFL in how PFF is projecting this advantage. And I know Darius Slayton, he's done well lately, right? He's had 3 straight games or 3 of the last 4 games where he's been a wide receiver 24 or better. And 4 of the last 6 where he's finished his top 24 wide receiver. He's gotten 8, 6, 10, 4, 6, and 6 targets during that span. But this is a really, really tough matchup, and I'm not confident firing up Slayton. Whereas even with Leonard Fournette, splitting carries and splitting targets with Rachaad White, last week, Rachaad White, finished as the running back 14 on the week. Rachaad White has finished as a top 20 running back each of the last 3. He's had 17 opportunities in week 13, he had 9 rushes, 8 targets. Week 12, he had 14 rushes, 9 targets. Week 10 against Seattle, he had 22 rush attempts. So this is a player who's getting a ton of opportunity. Give me Rachaad White over Slayton. And then Cam Akers is... yeah, he's running back 26 for me right now. He's consensus running back 27. I know he finished as the running back 7 last week, but he had 2 rushing scores against the Seattle defense that gives up a lot of fantasy points to the running back position. He wasn't super efficient on the ground, 17 for 60. So we're talking not even 4 yards a carry for Cam Akers. Yes, can he fall in the end zone? Sure, but this is not like a superior plus matchup. Cam Akers is a player that he doesn't fall in the end zone. He's left with, 1 catch for 0 yards and 60 rushing yards. There's no upside for Cam Akers outside of falling in the end zone for 2 touchdowns, which is also fluky. So I'm not banking on Cam Akers. Give me the volume of Rachaad White over Slayton and Akers, Antonio, especially in a full PPR. Mark Folkman from YouTube, do you see any upside with Drake London, especially since Ritter may be the new starter? Well, I don't think that's officially been made yet, has it? That there's been a lot of rumblings about Desmond Ritter. Is he going to get the start? It's possible. But let's look at what, where is he? Yeah, Drake London, the Atlanta Falcons are on a bye this week. The decision might be made during the course of the bye week just to see what the Falcons have in Desmond Ritter, but he's the 3rd round pick. Let's talk about Desmond Ritter for a second, because I think he's worth chatting about. He's a 3rd round pick, 10th in the 3rd round. The player profiler comp for Desmond Ritter is Alex Smith, which I like that mobility. He is a 97th percentile 40-yard dash, 95th percentile burst score. He's a mobile quarterback, 23 years old, out of Cincinnati. You saw them go to the bowl games last year, and Ritter threw for 30 passing touchdowns in his 4th season for the Bearcats. He had 355 rushing yards, so he dialed up the pass attempts and passing yards in 14 games last year, 3,334 passing yards. He was throwing to the likes of Alec Pierce at Cincy. He increased his yards per attempt each of the last 3 years when at Cincinnati. And, I think that he's the type of player that's worth getting a look. I'm just not, I don't see a lot of upside. We looked at some of the preseason games for Desmond Ritter, and yes, a lot can happen between now and the preseason and now, and how many reps he's getting, and maybe over the course of the bye week we're going to see an increase in those snaps. But for right now, I don't know if it's going to come down to Desmond Ritter being the difference. I think it's going to be Arthur Smith, the play caller, having to dial up more pass attempts, right? It's going to be him, because you can think of Desmond Ritter in the same vein as Marcus Mariota. They're both mobile quarterbacks. They both don't have superior arm strength. And so if Arthur Smith is dialing up the same type of play calling and the same type of play calling, same level of conservative play and not involving his playmakers as much, that should be concerning. So I think this is worth monitoring. Anytime there's a change, we're asking what can we expect? And I'm just tempering expectations. I don't think that Desmond Ritter immediately steps in and is the savior, but maybe the coaches are like, you know what, we're just going to let him off the leash and see what we can do, because we know what we have in Marcus Mariota. Whew. Good question, Mark. Abraham Yusuf, thanks for tuning in from YouTube. Appreciate you asking about Swift or ETN in half PPR. Let me pull up my running back rankings. This is a tough matchup on the ground for Swift and Jamal Williams. I've already mentioned Jamal Williams having a tough matchup. The Vikings give up less than 4 yards per carry on the season, and also are the second best run defensive graded PFF unit. But also DeAndre Swift picked up a questionable tag with an ankle injury. He still should be good to go according to the reports, but he was completely removed from the injury report prior to week 13. So we're going to continue to monitor this situation for DeAndre Swift. As you remember, Swift finished as the running back 5 last week. This was a good call by me. So shout out to me, right? Telling you to start DeAndre Swift last week with confidence. And some of y'all were like, oh my gosh, yes, what? So that was good. But Swift right now is the consensus running back 14 against a tough Minnesota rush defense. Minnesota does not give up a ton on the ground, but they give up a lot through the air. And so I think Swift makes the most in the pass catching realm. Jamal Williams really doesn't do much as a pass catcher, right? Jamal Williams has had 0 targets each of the last 5 games. Each of the last 5 games, he's exclusively like that bull rush runner. Whereas DeAndre Swift has had since week 8, 5, 4, 3, 3, 8. I need to use 2 hands now, and then 6 targets. So he's involved in the passing game. And if we're going to be funneling offensive options, it's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's going to be DeAndre Swift. And I'm willing to take some deep shots on DJ Chark, for instance. I'm not confident starting Khalif Raymond or Josh Reynolds or Jameson Williams, but those types of players, I wouldn't be surprised if you've got like putting those players as one of your bullets in a DFS might get you a really cheap touchdown. So am I starting Swift or Travis Etienne this week? I have Etienne slightly ahead. Tennessee gives up does not give up almost any fantasy points on the ground to running backs, which is tough for Etienne. But in the same vein, the Titans give up the most receptions to running backs. They give up almost 7 receptions per game to the running back position. So this fits in with the Travis Etienne profile of he's a capable pass catcher. But if you're also taking a deep shot, JaMycal Hasty might be an interesting play here. JaMycal Hasty, right, he had 5 targets against Baltimore in week 12. So that might be interesting. He finishes the running back 7 that week when Etienne was out. So maybe JaMycal Hasty is a really deep cut if you want to take, it's by Mageddon. I don't know exactly what your leagues are looking like, but it could be really ugly. And Etienne, I think if it's a half PPR, if it's really close in these tiers, I usually look at how are the game scripts and how are the game totals looking. And the Detroit implied points total, they are favored by 2.5 points at home, whereas the Jacksonville Jaguars are road dogs in a game that's projected to have 10 fewer points scored. So maybe I do need to move Swift over Etienne in this matchup. That would put Swift at like running back 11 or 12 and Etienne just behind him. But I think they're in the similar tier. That's where I'm looking at. So maybe I'll lean Swift. I think I'm making a rankings change because of we're digging into this a little deeper. Jay Ayers from Twitch, appreciate you. Appreciate you jumping in. 8 touchdowns in 4 games. It's clearly Watson over Hollywood. He's got no competition. There's a must start. He's done it with both quarterbacks. I mean, Christian Watson was able to break one big 50-yard touchdown off with Jordan Love. That's true. But I am a little more skeptical of how good Jordan Love is long-term. And maybe I'm wrong on Jordan Love. Maybe he just needed to develop for years, but he was not looking good for a while there. And I'm willing to change my tune on Jordan Love. It's just a matter of he's still he's gotten better, over the last couple years, but I'm still not confident in what he can do compared to even an injured Aaron Rodgers and what injured Aaron Rodgers can do. And that also ties into what Mark is asking. Thanks for your insights. Just curious, since you said you were a Packers fan, would you rather see them ride out with Aaron Rodgers, trade him, rebuild, or go with Love from here on out? Oh, man. That's a tough one. I think I'll go with, if Aaron Rodgers is willing to play with Green Bay, you are not dealing him away. You're going to ride with Aaron Rodgers until he says, you know what, I need to get out of here. And I'm okay with that. I've got no ill will toward Aaron Rodgers. I know some people have some animosity toward him. I think that the Packers were the ones who were screwing him over. They're the ones who were mismanaging. They're the ones who messed up They finally drafted Christian Watson, which I was mildly happy about, but I've been skeptical this year. They shouldn't have drafted A.J. Dillon. I love Dillon as a person. I love Dillon as a fantasy person. He gets it. I love him as a player. I think he's a good NFL player. I respect his TikTok game, but A.J. Dillon was not the right pick for the Green Bay Packers. There is just a suboptimal pick, a second round. You need a generational running back. You need a DeAndre Swift type. You need a Jonathan Taylor type. You need a Kenneth Walker or Breece Hall in the second round, not an A.J. Dillon. Dillon probably profiled as more of a third round running back. Maybe the Packers were afraid that he wouldn't come back to them in the third round, but as we know, running backs are the most replaceable position, and you can pick them up on the cheap. I mean, look at what James Conner did in his first year in free agency outside of Pittsburgh. He signed on the cheap for Arizona, right? And put up a massive game, a massive season. And then, he's re-signs the big contract. But investing high-end draft capital on a team where you're building from the inside out. You build your defense. The Packers have some really nice defensive pieces. They've got Quay Walker. They've got a couple defensive linemen who are really nice. They've got Jair Alexander that they've locked up. But and Bakhtiari is, we're going to be looking for probably some future replacements at left tackle, unfortunately. But I think the Packers have done Rodgers dirty with drafting Amari Rodgers in the third round, right? Rodgers isn't even on the team right now. And then Kylan Hill in the seventh round as another running back speculative ad. Like, no, you take upside picks with those late round draft capital type of players. Or if you're planning on taking someone, like I don't know. I'm really tilted from previous years where the Packers have done them dirty. The Packers have put themselves in awkward position. They should be at the mercy of Rodgers. Honestly, I think this is a time and place where it comes down to, as long as Aaron Rodgers wants to be there, I'm riding with him. I'm saying go number 12 because I think he gives the best chance for them to win a Super Bowl. And where else are you going to go? Like, I don't think Jordan Love is an upgrade. And if you trade Aaron Rodgers, like, are you going to get back what you want? I mean, maybe if the Packers can get a top 5 pick in this draft, or if they can trade Rodgers for a first round pick plus, and then also, package their first to move up to get one of the quarterbacks in this draft that is really, really good, and then trade Jordan Love as another replacement. That's a possibility, but I think I'm hoping that Aaron Rodgers wants to stay as long as he can. It would be really, really sad to see him fall to the wayside of Brett Favre, where Favre goes to the Jets and the Vikings, and it'd be really sad. So I hope, as a Packers fan, like, that Aaron Rodgers sticks around with the Packers. It's good for the team. It's good for him, hopefully. Okay, personally, what do you think is best overall? Half PPR, or no PPR? I like PPR the best. Half PPR, it feels forced on me by the industry. Like, that's what the industry #industry bros are doing, is half PPR. And like, I have to do the conversions in my head of like, okay, half the receptions gives that plus the yards, plus the other yards. Like almost all of my leagues are full PPR leagues, and it makes sense. You add the catches plus the yards. It's easy math. I don't like doing the harder math, and maybe I know I'm not doing the calculations, but I'm also following it in my brain. I also found that half PPR is really hard to rank tight ends because volume is more predictable. For fantasy finishes, and volume is more influential on PPR than it is on half PPR. Touchdowns influence finishes at the tight end position more, for instance, in half PPR or in standard league. Like if they fall in the end zone, that's the equivalent of getting 60 yards receiving. Right? Whereas you want to reward a player who, 3 for 30. Is that the same as, well, I guess 3 for 30 isn't going to work because that would be like, let's say, a player goes 3 for 35. So that's 6.5. And a 5-yard touchdown catch, right? That's going to be the same. Give me the PPR. I think it's a lot more fun to work with the rankings. Probably it makes more sense to me. Half PPR is like the compromise between people who use standard and just go with the touchdowns, because there are some only touchdown leagues out there, and some people are just anti PPR. So I think half PPR is this awkward child compromise, and it's what the industry bros use. Fine, whatever. That's what we got to do. Okay. Ibrahim Yusuf, Kansas or Eagles D this week. Kansas City, they get the Denver Broncos, and you're starting them. I think the Eagles, at least the Giants, will put up a fight. I think the Giants will put up a fight. The Daniel Jones can run the ball, and Darius Slayton has been okay as of late. But give me the Chiefs over the Eagles this week. At least as from the eye test. I haven't finalized those rankings, but that's who I would go with if I had to start someone today. Yeah, Mark is saying, I feel as a Ravens fan, Rodgers and Lamar are in the same boat. I want to pay the man, but they didn't do with no top targets other than Andrews. I mean, what the heck, right? What the heck? Pay Lamar Jackson. But this was my bold call over the summer. I said Joe Burrow is going to sign an extension with Cincinnati before Lamar Jackson signs an extension with Baltimore. I mean, I don't understand where there's a disconnect between what Baltimore and between what Lamar Jackson sees. Right. Let's say it's not necessarily Deshaun Watson money, but you have to know as an agent that the only reason Deshaun Watson got that trade off and waived his no trade clause to the Cleveland Browns is because of the guaranteed money, right? The Browns were taken off the table. I remember where I was. I was on a golf course. I took a day off from school. I was on the golf course. I was on hole number 2, and I got the notification that the Browns were out of the running for Deshaun Watson. And I said, oh, okay, fine, whatever. I didn't really understand why the Browns were pursuing Deshaun Watson at the time. I was like, all right, fine, but they want to upgrade. I felt like Baker Mayfield was done dirty all through all of that. But then fast forward a couple more hours, and it says, okay, actually, the Browns are in it, because the Browns probably went to Deshaun Watson's agent and said, like, look, what will it take? And Watson's agent probably said, guarantee me $230 million regardless of the outcome of this, and you got yourself a deal. I bet you that's what happened, and the Browns said, okay, screw it. Which messes over the quarterback market, because now the agents for quarterbacks who are signing extensions like Lamar Jackson are going to be expecting like a lot of guaranteed money. And I'm not saying Lamar Jackson doesn't deserve it, but I think that the Deshaun Watson contract is an awkward one, because we all know why it was reset. it was kind of an anomaly. There wasn't this kind of guaranteed money. I think it does fall into the Aaron Rodgers category, though, where else are the Ravens going to get a replacement quarterback? Are they going to bring back Joe Flacco? Yeah, I joke about that, but like, are the Ravens okay with a mediocre quarterback play? Whereas Lamar is the type of needle moving talent that can get the Ravens, like, if they fall on the right side of variance, they could win a Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar has the intangibles to get them to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. It's just a matter of, are the players on the Ravens going to stay healthy? Can there be a couple of pieces added to the Ravens? I mean, the defense is slowly looking like it could turn into an absolute juggernaut, but you need to address the offensive side of the ball. And I think that's what we're looking at for Lamar Jackson is, who are you going to replace him with? And if it's not someone who can move the needle like Lamar Jackson can for games, then I don't think it's worth looking outside of Jackson. Ibrahim Yusuf off the eye test, who wins half PPR? Oh man. Geno, CMC, Saquon, Amon-Ra, AJ Brown. The Muth is Luth. Swift, Butker, the Chiefs D versus Allen. So we're going to give Josh Allen the lean there at quarterback. CMC, Saquon over Lenny Sanders. Tyreek Hill versus AJ Brown. I think the lean is slightly Hill, but they're pretty close. CD Lamb. Oh, it's Hill over Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think they're a similar tier. CD Lamb. Oh man. Yeah, looking at the wide receiver rankings for this week. I'm pretty sure CD Lamb, yeah, he is he got a 93% advantage versus Houston, but it's going to be a tough matchup this week. Foster versus Muth. Foster Moreau, that's right. DeAndre Hopkins versus Swift. Maher versus Butker, and Eagles defense. I think I'm going to go with the Geno team. Even though there are a couple nice pieces on team number 2. I'll go with team number 1. All right, cool. Let's talk about a few other players. Are you starting? Do I start Ezekiel Elliott this week? The answer is that the Cowboys get the Houston Texans. So it's not just that Zeke gets the Texans, but that's like a major factor. Is that Zeke, after finishing as the running back 45 or worse in weeks 1 and 2, he's finished as the running back 13 or better in 6 of the last 8 games. And yes, it's been touchdown driven, but fine. He gets touchdowns. And the Cowboys are 17-point favorites at home against a Houston club that just allowed 3 defensive special team touchdowns to the Cleveland Browns. It's going to be a bloodbath. And Zeke is going to be at the front line and the goal line of this matchup. You're starting Ezekiel Elliott this week, even with Tony Pollard having himself some weeks this little stretch. So you're still starting Ezekiel Elliott as a high-end running back 2 against Houston. On the flip side, do I start running back Dameon Pierce? And we've seen Dameon Pierce game scripted out of games, not just this season, but recently this season. This matchup against Dallas doesn't look good for the rookie. In a 2-game stretch before week 13 against this Browns defense, Pierce combined for 16 rushing yards on 15 carries. That's really bad. And he's had 0 touchdowns over the last 4 or 5 games. On average, Pierce has finished as the running back 50 during that 2-game stretch. The Cowboys, as I mentioned, they're 17-point favorites. And look, Pierce might get a little bit of sprinkling in the passing game, but his floor is just so risky. I think you're sitting Dameon Pierce this week. I'm looking at Dameon Pierce or Jamal Williams, you're starting Jamal Williams. Dameon Pierce or Leonard Fournette, I'm starting Leonard Fournette. Dameon Pierce or Raheem Mostert, I'm starting Raheem Mostert. Dameon Pierce or James Cook this week, I think you're still going James Cook. Dameon Pierce or Kareem Hunt this week, I think you're going Kareem Hunt. Finally, we're getting into the are we going Kyren Williams, Jerick McKinnon, Dameon Pierce level. Like, I think it's going to be that bad for Dameon Pierce. This is an extremely scary floor for Dameon Pierce. You're starting Zonovan Knight over Dameon Pierce. You're starting Devin Singletary over Dameon Pierce. You're starting, if Donta Foreman is out, and Foreman missed practice this week, you're starting Chuba Hubbard. If Foreman is out, you're starting him over Dameon Pierce. But Foreman, the update looks like, even though he did not have practice on Wednesday, it was more precautionary than anything. He says he's, quote, 95% sure he will play against Seattle. So I still have Donta Foreman over Dameon Pierce in this game. It's so bad. You have Jeff Wilson over Dameon Pierce. You're benching Dameon Pierce in most leagues unless you're massively affected by the bipocalypse. Question for this week: do I start Zay Jones? And Zay Jones, he had a tough week last week. I think it was just unlucky. He's usually pretty sure-handed. Zay Jones had over 100 receptions in his final year in college and was a former second-round pick of the Buffalo Bills. He only caught 2 of 7 targets in this game against Detroit, but he gets another shot at it, and fantasy managers should not be left on tilt. The Titans, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, give up the most receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers, and they allow the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. It's going to be Christian Kirk. It's going to be Zay Jones. It's going to be Marvin Jones. A deep cut is Marvin Jones for this week, especially with how stifling the Tennessee run defense is and has been as of late. Passes may be funneled Jones' way. And looking at what Zay Jones has done on the season, he's wide receiver 35 in fantasy points per game, wide receiver 33 in total fantasy points. He is wide receiver 29 in target share, 23%, 26th among wide receivers in target rate at 25.4%. He's had 10 red zone targets, which is 24th among wide receivers. He's 25th in yards after the catch among wide receivers. He's 18th in receptions, 16th in target accuracy. This is a player 27th among all wide receivers in win rate versus man coverage, and 23rd in target rate versus man coverage. And he's 25th among all wide receivers in total route wins per playerprofiler.com. So Zay Jones, this is a player that, he had a bad game last week, but I'm anticipating a bounce back and hopefully falling on the right side of variance. Another question: do I start Juju Smith-Schuster this week? And Juju Smith-Schuster, he left the game a couple weeks ago due to a concussion and just hasn't looked the same since. The Broncos may be struggling in offense, but their secondary has been really tough and has been keeping them in games. The Broncos are PFF's best graded coverage unit and have allowed the fewest receptions and fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And even though, as I mentioned, Juju has worked his way back into a majority role in this wide receiver core for the Kansas City Chiefs, he's finished as the wide receiver 69 and 58 each of the last 2 weeks. The Chiefs are 9.5 point favorites in this game, and I don't think they'll need Juju Smith-Schuster. He may just be left to the wayside. I feel like this is going to be more of a Travis Kelce game and an Isaiah Pacheco game. And with Juju not doing well as of late, I have my concerns. So if you have other players, like I would consider starting, for instance, let me pull up my rankings here. But like, you're starting Marquise Brown over Juju Smith-Schuster, right? You're starting, if you're feeling a little spicy, Zay Jones over Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that the optimism for Juju is based on what he was doing before the concussion, before the injury, and now we've got some really tough matchups in Denver. So I'm tempering optimism for Juju. If you have other options like Devonta Smith, Brandon Ayuk, I think you're starting DJ Moore over him. You're starting Christian Kirk, of course, over him. So that's where I'm looking at for Juju Smith-Schuster. Do I start DJ Chark this week? Right? DJ Chark has made his way back from an injury that cost him 6 games. And over the last 2 contests, Chark either has a touchdown or 98 yards receiving. And I can't emphasize this enough. The Minnesota Vikings give up the most receiving yards to wide receivers. This is a potential and divisional shootout in a dome, 52.5 point over under. Chark is a very, very interesting play this week. I'm not concerned about Jameson Williams just yet eating into DJ Chark. Instead, Williams will have to take all of Khalif Raymond and all of Josh Reynolds snaps before we start seeing it impact DJ Chark. And I don't think it's going to happen in week 14. Even if they ramp up the Lions ramp up Jameson Williams snaps and targets and everything, I still think DJ Chark is going to be on the outside. I think it's going to be Jameson Williams on the outside or the combination of Raymond and Reynolds. And then in the slot, I'm on Ross St. Brown. So DJ Chark is a deep cut right now, and he's the consensus wide receiver 41. He should be started over the likes of Van Jefferson. He should be started over Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He should be started over even Donovan Peoples-Jones. I would start him. I think we're getting into the low end wide receiver 3 area for DJ Chark. Treylon Burks probably doesn't go, so we can bump him up there. DJ Chark, I think a back end wide receiver 3 consideration for this week, given the matchup and given what he's done the last couple weeks as well. All right. Put some questions, comments in the chat too. I'm going to keep going with some start sits that I have prepared. But if you want to ask some questions, make sure you're putting those in. Also, if you're new to the channel, haven't subscribed yet, make sure you're doing that, hitting the red subscribe button right there. Appreciate all of you joining the community, jumping in, watching, viewing, and enjoying the content. Do I start wide receiver Gabriel Davis this week? And after talking about Davis, I will get to more of the questions that have popped in the chat. But do I start Gabriel Davis this week? Anything can happen, of course, when you put Josh Allen and Gabriel Davis on the field together. But the Jets, and in particular Rookie of the Year candidate Sauce Gardner, have been locking down opposing outside wide receivers. The Jets' secondary is PFF's second best coverage grade unit. But what's more, the Jets' defensive line also projects a 29% pass block advantage over the Bills. This is a sneaky tough matchup, and Gabriel Davis has finished outside of the top 30 of wide receivers each of the last 3 weeks and 5 of the last 6. I don't think Gabriel Davis has the launch pad in this game. So could he break off a 160-yard catch for a touchdown and just make your day? Sure. But if I have other options, like Gabriel Davis should not be started. Could we look at Adam Thielen starting over Gabriel Davis? Yes. Could we think about Zay Jones starting over Gabriel Davis? Yes. I think we're starting to get into what kind of upside do we have? Deontay Johnson versus Gabe Davis, right? There's not a lot of upside there. Give me DJ Chark right over Deontay Johnson for right now. And Deontay Johnson is questionable. I know Johnson is the wide receiver 30, but Deontay Johnson has finished at best the wide receiver 29 on a week this season. Like, I know I flipped it into, is this Gabriel Davis versus Deontay Johnson? But I don't know how you can start Deontay Johnson with any confidence. He was wide receiver 38 this past week, and then wide receiver 56, 61, 40, 52, 45, 47, 37 back week 5 against Buffalo. It hasn't been since week 3 where he was wide receiver 29. Okay, and yes, he hasn't caught a touchdown this year, but you think he's going to do that against Baltimore? You really think Deontay Johnson is going to catch? It's a bad bet. Like, if he does, it's just a bad bet. Deontay Johnson is one of the worst PFF projected percent advantages. He has a 12% advantage versus the Baltimore secondary. Average is 50%, and he has a 12% advantage. So no, you can't have a lot of optimism about Deontay Johnson right now. And so you are starting Gabe Davis over Johnson, but Gabe Davis is more of a mid-pack to high-end wide receiver 3 this week than the wide receiver 2, back-end wide receiver 2 that he's being ranked right now. Mark is asking from YouTube, Peoples-Jones or Pickens? It seems like Pickens has been boom bust. Yeah, Donovan Peoples-Jones also has a really tough matchup against Cincinnati. Let me pull up the matchup stats, but I'm pretty sure the Cincinnati secondary has been pretty locked down against wide receivers. I'll just verify that here real quick, but I agree with you. Pickens has been boom bust. He hasn't been able to get a lot of separation. He's made a lot of nice plays, but it's usually contested catches near the sideline. And yeah, Cincinnati gives up 23 fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. They give up 9.7 receptions to receivers, which is, let me load here. I think it's the fewest. Yeah, Cincinnati gives up the fewest wide receiver receptions to wide receiver cores on the year. Only 138 receiving yards to wide receivers allowed per game. So a DPJ, like, he bailed you out last week with a special teams touchdown, but he only went 3 for 44 on 3 targets against Houston. And could you see more of like a 4 for 40, 4 for 40, 4 for 50 against Cincinnati? Sure. 4 for 50 against Cincinnati. Fine. But that's only going to get you 7 fantasy points. Like, are you okay with a wide receiver 45, wide receiver 50? So that's, yeah, I would rather take the upside with Pickens, because I think Watson is still brushing off the dust, and Cincinnati is no secondary to scoff at. Do I start Dulcich or Gerald Everett this week? Let's pull up the tight end, the good old tight end rankings. I have them back to back right now. I give Everett the slight edge. Gerald Everett is the consensus tight end 8 on the week. He finishes the tight end 6 last week, 5 for 80 on 6 targets. That's pretty nice. But Greg Dulcich has a negative 32% advantage versus linebacker Willie Gay per PFF. Willie Gay has played pretty tough against opposing tight ends. Dulcich is the consensus 7. He finishes the tight end 4 last week. I think we're monitoring this situation. I may have to bump up Dulcich even with the tougher matchup if we get an official ruling that Sutton is out, because Dulcich was able to get 8 targets. 8 targets. You can't argue with tight end volume. I know he hasn't fallen in the end zone since week 6, but Dulcich, I think, is probably going to be the move here. So I'm making that official rankings change. Dulcich over Everett this week. Serendipity trick shots. Drug Squidward, what's up? I got a question. Peoples-Jones or McKinnon this week? Yeah, this is how gross it's getting, Drunk Squidward. This is how gross it's getting. I mentioned Donovan Peoples-Jones as like a high-end wide receiver 4. And in half PPR, Peoples-Jones is projected to have 8.3 fantasy points. So that seems about right. And then flipping back to McKinnon, right? He's the consensus wide or running back 33, projected 6.4 fantasy points per Fantasy Pros, but he's coming off a real nice game against Cincinnati. And then Denver, as I mentioned, this game could be a blowout and it could be a Pacheco game. So maybe we don't go with Jerick McKinnon. Maybe we go with Donovan Peoples-Jones. So I'll go Peoples-Jones over McKinnon this week. Yeah, well, there's bye week, so I have no choice. Victim of bye apocalypse, or the bye Mageddon, however you feel about it. They're drunk Squidward. All right, let's keep her going. I got a couple more players that I want to talk start sits, but also throw them in the comments. Make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button if you are new to the YouTube channel as well. And I want to talk about another player. Hurts my soul. Do I start Mike Evans this week? Oh boy. Even on Monday night's broadcast, it was reported that Chris Godwin is operating as the wide receiver 1 in Tampa Bay. And if this is the first you're hearing of it, you haven't been paying attention lately. You haven't been paying attention to the news. Evans has finished as the wide receiver 44 or worse each of the last 3 weeks. It hasn't helped that he hasn't caught a touchdown since week 4. Yes, he's fallen on the wrong side of touchdown variance, but he hasn't earned even a 20% target share in 5 of 11 games this season, and he's coming off a 7.5% target share. This was a game with Godwin, Gage, and Jones also in the receiver rotation. Mike Evans, he is still on pace to get his 1,000 yards, but he's only skirted there each of the last 2 years. And if, he's wide receiver 21 in fantasy points per game, that is his worst rate since 2015. So do I start him this week against San Francisco? San Francisco, talk about difficulty against the wide receiver position, right? They are, middle of the pack. The 49ers, they give up 28.9 fantasy points, 12 receptions to the wide receiver position. They give up less than 1 receiver touchdown per game, 167. They are, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th. They're 10th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, but it's still Godwin ahead of Mike Evans in this rotation. There's just such a scary floor. So, I had moved Mike Evans down from wide receiver 18 to wide receiver 25 last week, and I wasn't low enough on Mike Evans. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast when I talked about Tom Brady, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are just outmatched at the offensive defensive line. The San Francisco 49ers are projected to have a 25% pass block advantage over the offensive line of the Buccaneers. So this is a problem for Brady, who struggled under pressure. He struggled to get the ball deep, and Evans, who's been struggling to get a target share. So there's just a lot of red flags for Mike Evans. I don't know why consensus has him at wide receiver 19. You're starting Marquise Brown over him. You're starting Brandon Ayuk over him. You're starting Deebo Samuel, Devonta Smith over him. Of course, you're starting Garrett Wilson over him, even against Buffalo. You're concerned about Mike Evans. I think he falls outside the top 25 yet again. So if you have a wide receiver 2, you have Amari Cooper and Tyler Lockett, you're starting those 2 wide receivers over Mike Evans this week. In particular, you're starting Tyler Lockett because Lockett has a 99.9% advantage versus Carolina's secondary per PFF. Average is 50%. Lockett has a 99.9% projected PFF advantage. So you're starting Tyler Lockett over Mike Evans this week. Okay, Drunk Squidward has a question from YouTube. Thanks for popping in. Here's an interesting question. Tua or Tyler Huntley? Tua with an amazing offense, or do I start Huntley with rushing upside? We're going with Tua, baby. I know that I wouldn't say that there's rushing upside with Tyler Huntley. There's a rushing floor with Huntley. In all 5 of the games where he threw 30 or more passes last season, he had at least 40 rushing yards. But Tua Tagovailoa has a 32% pass block advantage over the LA Chargers defensive line. And we've seen Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Jalen Waddle, he has been injured, but Gesicki might be a really sneaky tight end add this week, especially if Waddle is out. Gesicki right now has the, as I mentioned, a 32% pass block advantage. And yes, Gesicki has struggled to get targets as of late, and he's not done well, but we've also seen some elite upside games from Gesicki. And if Waddle is out, Gesicki is an interesting tight end streamer this week. Gesicki finishes the tight end 4, tight end 1, and tight end 7 in 3 games this year. So we've seen some high upside from Gesicki, but you're starting to no-brainer over Huntley this week. I don't see them in very, very, very close range. Okay, yes. And even though Tua has finished as the quarterback 18 and 17, those have been tough matchups. He gets the Chargers this week, and the Chargers give up lots and lots of fantasy points. So there we go. Okay. Drunk Squidward said, I picked up Tyler Huntley in both my dynasty leagues. I think that's a smart move. I bet you that some team is going to look at Tyler Huntley and say, you know what? You give us a different dimension. Like, Huntley might be a very interesting, he's either going to stay on the Ravens and be a very interesting backup, or maybe another team goes out and says, you know what? We want to give you starter money to see what you can do in our offense. So I would be interested to see how he goes looking forward. He's shown some interesting upside, but for right now, I do have Tua over Huntley very comfortably for this week's rankings. All right. Start to Trilingual Kid. Appreciate you jumping in from YouTube. And if you're new to this channel, the Best Bell Fantasy, make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button. I appreciate all of you jumping in and asking your questions. And we're talking start sits. It's been a lot of fun. Starting 2 this week. This is what Trilingual Kid asks. Are we starting James Cook, Zonovan Knight, Tyler Boyd, or Mac Hollins? Well, just by the eye test, I'm probably going with Zonovan Knight as a pick. There's been a lot of positive buzz about Zonovan Knight, even with Michael Carter back. Carter has been removed from the injury report with the ankle injury. However, Zonovan Knight was playing 40% of the snaps behind Michael Carter, and Ty Johnson was also Tyler Johnson was also Ty Johnson was also a player that was interesting in PPR. So there we go. Let's see. Who else? James Cook or Tyler? Well, I'm on wide receivers right now, so let's go Tyler Boyd against Cleveland. Look at what Tyler Boyd did against Cleveland. He finished as the wide receiver 25 last time, went 3 for 38. He did have the touchdown, but Boyd has been ice cold as of late. 4 straight games, wide receiver 45 or worse against Pittsburgh, who is a generous secondary, Tennessee, who is a generous secondary, and a Kansas City game 4 for 60 on 5 targets. Still not what you want, because I think he had a fumble in there, or actually he wide receiver 44, 4 for 60, 8 fantasy points. That's not really going to get you done or get it done for you. Okay. Let's see here. So James Cook, Zonovan Knight, Tyler Boyd, Mac Hollins. Mac Hollins right now, we're not expecting that Hunter Renfrow make it back. We're not expecting Darren Waller for this game. And we've seen some spike weeks from Mac Hollins. The Rams have been beat up. I mentioned that Derek Carr is a start for me this week. Wide receiver 19 back in week 12 against Seattle. This is a short week. Anything can happen. And, if the Rams, Jalen Ramsey goes up against Devontae Adams, then Mac Hollins might also get a lot of targets. We've seen at least 5 targets for Mac Hollins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in 4 of the last 4 games for Mac Hollins as well. So if I'm starting someone, I think that I'm going Mac Hollins over Tyler Boyd and Zonovan Knight over James Cook. So it's a question of Mac Hollins versus James Cook. And looking at the running backs, you have to like what James Cook has done as of late. But the Jets, as I mentioned, are a really tough front seven. Okay. The Jets have a 43% run block advantage with their defensive line over the offensive line of the Buffalo Bills. So this is a really negative matchup for James Cook getting it going on the ground. So he would have to make his moves through the air. He has had 5 targets each of the last 2 games. So I would probably lean Zonovan Knight and James Cook in a game with the Jets that could turn into more of a sneaky shootout than what we're projecting for it, right? So there we go. Did CMC's value just go up because of Purdy and Mitchell? I mean, you know that the upside for Christian McCaffrey is still the running back 1 overall, but I think his floor has been lowered. It's just because Deebo Samuel is there. You know that there's going to be other running backs who are going to be involved. Like Jordan Mason went 8 for 51 this past week. There are other running backs. Tyrion Davis-Price can get sprinkled in. So I don't think there's much of a value shift for CMC versus Purdy. I mean, I want to get more of a sample size for Purdy to iron out that opinion. But for right now, I don't see it as really shifting very much. Serendipity trick shots. If Waddle doesn't play, do I take Gesicki over Moreau? I think that you're still starting Moreau over Gesicki in that scenario. The floor is still just so scary for Mike Gesicki, because even in a plus matchup, we've seen this happen to like Dawson Knox as of late. I think Gesicki and Dawson Knox are very similar, fantasy options. They have really high upside. They're connected to a good quarterback and a good offense that scores touchdowns. But Foster Moreau, let's look at what he's done over the past few games. Moreau, at least 3 targets every single game, at least 28 receiving yards every single game. And if he falls in the end zone, he's a top 10 tight end. And this is against the LA Rams. And we've talked about a consolidated target share for Devontae Adams. So if Adams is shadowed by Jalen Ramsey, you could see Carr looking at Moreau's way, middle of the field. You could look at Mac Hollins with a couple deep shots. I'm still going with Moreau over Gesicki, even though I can see the upside of Gesicki is higher than Moreau, even with Waddle out. Okay. Trilingual kid, Buffalo run defense ain't no joke. That's why I'm afraid to play Knight. Well, let's talk about the Buffalo run defense. I'll pull up the stats and we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. Knight has looked the part. He's been a dynamic player. The undrafted free agent profiles more as, 5'11", 209 running back. He handled at North Carolina State. He handled 136 rush attempts every season. He had at least 740 rushing yards every season. He had 20 receptions each of the last 2 years he was at North Carolina State. And the Buffalo Bills, looking at their running back stats, I'm agnostic until I see it. The Buffalo Bills, where are they at? I'm scanning right now. They give up 18.6 fantasy points to opposing running backs. They give up 81 rushing yards, but it's the pass catching. So Ty Johnson is interesting, but Zonovan Knight the last 2 games has also been involved in the passing game, right? 3 targets in week 12 and 5 targets in week 13. So I'm not afraid to play Zonovan Knight this week, especially if this game becomes a little bit more of a shootout than we're anticipating. I'm not as worried about the run defense. Like, Zonovan Knight, 14 and 15 carries, 5 red zone carries, and still wasn't able to convert a touchdown. So it's only a matter of time for him to fall into the end zone. In both games, Knight has played over 100 total yards. I think he's the real deal. I think Zonovan Knight is the real deal. So you should play Zonovan Knight with a little bit more confidence than I think what the consensus has him at. What are my thoughts on Samaje Perine? He's the handcuff, but he's a back-end running back one if Mixon is out. Mixon is expected to play this game. He's expected to clear the concussion protocol. I don't know if that's official yet, but you're not starting Samaje Perine if Joe Mixon is active. And Mixon was a full participant at Wednesday's practice. He has cleared the concussion protocol. So Samaje Perine, he's just a handcuff stash. Okay. Let's see. Pacheco, Rashad, Moore, or Zay Jones at flex. Oh, man. Icy. You're giving me tough ones because I don't know which Moore you're talking about. There's Rondell Moore. There's DJ Moore, right? There's a few Moores out there that could fall into this awkward Moore scenario. Elijah Moore even, right? There's some people who are really bullish on Elijah Moore this week. Pacheco, Rashad White, Moore, or Zay Jones. And I think I think we're going Pacheco. I think we're going Rashad White, regardless of who it is. So there we go, Icy. That's how I would go. You're going running backs at the flex. Could I play both Zeke and Pollard in a DFS lineup this week? Oh, man. Des Morris, appreciate you jumping in from YouTube and asking this question. I would... My worry is that if you're taking I haven't looked at where DraftKings has the likes of a Malik Davis, but I wonder if that is an interesting deep cut, because let me pull up and see where Malik Davis is, because he's probably not going to be highly rostered. And as we saw when games got out of hand for the Dallas Cowboys, they were willing to give the ball to Malik Davis. So let me look up Malik. Malik Davis, 4,200 on DraftKings. I wonder what his rostership is going to be. So if you want to pivot off of the chalk that is going to be Zeke and Pollard, you have to anticipate high rosterships for either Zeke or Pollard or both of them. I would be willing to pivot off of Malik Davis and just see if you can get a really cheap 3X or 4X, off of a Malik Davis. So that's what I would think. I mean, if you're playing cash, I think Zeke and Pollard are decent, but I mean, let's look at what Malik Davis was able to do. Let me see. Malik Davis right now, he's the consensus running back 66, and he was the running back 27 against Indianapolis. He had the rushing score when that game was a blowout last week. He's finished as the running back 41, 43, and 47 when he's been active. Yes, those games, some of them were when Zeke was out, but I could very much see Malik Davis getting some run near the end of this game, especially if it's a blowout. The defense for the Cowboys is going to be super chalky, so I think you pivot almost with a Malik Davis. If you're playing cash, you're going to play Zeke and Pollard, of course, but I think if you're playing GPP, I think Malik Davis in one of your slots might be interesting. Isn't Darren Waller coming back soon? Yes, the report is that Waller should be back week 15. That's the rumblings I'm hearing. And same with Hunter Renfrow. Renfrow, I think it was just too tight of a turnaround for this week, but we will see if Darren Waller can make it back and be an impactful play. The Raiders need Renfrow and Waller back because they need some more weapons. It's been Josh Jacobs, it's been Devontae Adams, but we've seen Jacobs get banged up throughout this season. The consolidated target share, I think, is a lot for Jacobs. So my hope is that the return of Waller and Renfrow can take a load off of the pass catching of Jacobs, and he can still be a running back one for you. But Jacobs has been nursing this calf injury for a few weeks now, and he has a tough matchup against the LA Rams. The Rams are projected to have a 51% run block advantage over the Vegas Raiders. So I'm not saying fade Josh Jacobs this week, but I think that there's some tempering of expectations. I think this is going to be a Derek Carr, Devontae Adams type of game. So that's what I'm going with. Des, thanks for the advice. Hopefully you subscribe to the YouTube channel there, Des. Appreciate you if you haven't already. Is Renfrow even a guy to pick up when he's back? The answer is no. The answer is no. He gets like a 12-15% target share right now. I think it's clear that Devontae Adams is still going to be the guy. I think Adams still gets his 30 to 33% target share, even with Renfrow back, even with Waller back. That's how I'm valuing Adams, and Renfrow is going to get some pesky targets. He's going to be an improvement over Keelan Cole in the slot. Let's be real. From a real life and NFL perspective and fantasy football perspective, he's going to be better than the current slot Keelan Cole. But no, I don't think Renfrow is going to be a difference-making wide receiver like we had seen in previous years. Maybe the Rams can upset the Raiders with Baker Mayfield. That would be hilarious. I'm here for it. I'm all for it. I've got my Baker Mayfield Browns jersey upstairs. So look, that's where I would put it. So yeah, I'm rooting for Baker Mayfield to be successful. Like, I know a lot of people hate on Baker Mayfield, but like, I don't mind the guy. I feel like you got a raw deal in Cleveland. The Browns did not surround him with, good players at the start. And then they had all the coaching changes which screwed him up. And then he gets really hurt last year, like really, really hurt. And he played through it, which was a mistake. That was his mistake. And then the Browns went out and got Deshaun Watson. So that was upsetting, but nevertheless, Najee, it didn't practice. Is Jalen above Zonovan Knight? I wouldn't say that yet. I'm monitoring this situation. This is a tough matchup. Let me see the notes here. He did miss practice due to the oblique, but he missed practice on Wednesday and Thursday last week due to the same injury and was not, he didn't miss the game. So I think you're still going with Najee Harris, unless we hear otherwise. If Najee Harris doesn't practice on Friday, that's the red flag for us. Okay. Trilingual kid. So just be watching and monitoring the injuries, but I would still have Zonovan Knight over Jalen Warren. Des, thanks for subscribing. Appreciate you doing that, dude. It's been a pleasure. It's all a mutual. I appreciate all y'all jumping into the live stream. I've been on for almost 2 hours. This is not what I expected, but here we are. I'm here for the people, answering your questions. We're ready to do it. Drunk Squidward, I'm so glad I sold Matthew Stafford for the injury. Spinal contusion. Does he ever play again? Does he play again? I would put it at 60%. I think there's a 40% chance that he doesn't. And there are some leagues where I rostered Matthew Stafford in Dynasty, and that's going to really suck. So, yikes. Yeah. Does he ever play in the NFL again? I would say 60% chance, yes. I mean, we've seen spinal injuries recover, like Peyton Manning, right? The neck injury that we talked about. So, or that we've seen happen. Mark, say to go. Great show. Like and subscribe. Be like Mark. If you haven't subscribed, thanks so much. Appreciate you jumping in. Same with Dez. Thanks for the hard work and time. Let's crush it this weekend. I hope you crush it, Dez. I hope all y'all who are watching and viewing crush it this weekend. I usually don't do a live stream on Thursdays because of Thursday Night Football. I also write an article that day. Life gets busy, but I usually have a live stream either Friday or Saturday as we get prepared for the week. So make sure you turn on your notifications. I'll also be chopping up a lot of this content so that you can go back and say, okay, what did he say about this again? And search up the player. So I have this posted up, and also the individual player takes that I've mentioned as well. Okay. Thanks for answering questions. What's with the OBJ situation? Yeah, you can drop OBJ in redraft. Like already, you can leave him on waivers. There's no reason. Reportedly, the Cowboys medical staff noted that it would take a long time still for Odell to be game ready, and most likely not for this season. So we're going to fast forward to 2023 if any offer is being made. If you got him on dynasty leagues, like fine, you're holding him. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I mean, you're not dropping him probably in those deep dynasty leagues, but in redraft, you're just letting him go. Serendipity trick shots. Where are your articles? I write a weekly article for Fantasy Data, and I pick out two quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. One that I'm higher than consensus, one that I'm lower on consensus per position. And I just write a little blurb about each of them. It's been a fun article so far this year. Right now, I think I'm 43rd out of over 200 rankers on the Fantasy Pros Accuracy Rankings contest. I'm 24th at wide receiver. I'm 5th at IDP. I finished 8th at wide receiver this past week. I finished 5th at kicker. So where are my articles? That's where Top Prop Fantasy. I also do an article every week, talk about comparing 3 sets of props every week. And then hopefully I'm getting a full-time fantasy article out this week as well. We'll see when that drops, a Stardom Situm article. And so that's where we're at right now. Start Raiders defense, Eagles defense. Do I start one of these? Okay, so the Raiders, they get the Rams and Baker Mayfield. The Eagles get the Giants. I'm tempted to put the Raiders above them, especially if we get news that Baker Mayfield is going to be starter. Although, I mean, who is Baker going to throw to? Ben Skoranek? Allen Robinson is on an IR. Higbee's been dealing with injuries this year. Cooper Kupp is on IR. Like Tutu Atwell, is that who it's going to be? Yeah, you're going to start the Raiders defense. I think that's how you do it. Drunk Scored Word, thanks. Have a great night, man. Yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate y'all jumping in, and make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button. I appreciate all of you jumping in for almost the 2 hours that I've been live streaming. And until next time, everyone, until Thursday or Friday this weekend when I jump on again, good luck in the fantasy football streets, everyone.
I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. I embrace all